Well, you were just listening to a composition by Czech composer Václav Kuchera, who lived from 1929 until 2017. And you just heard Strophen from A Serious Hour After Rilke, as performed by soprano Sung-ji Kim, along with Stanley Alexandrowicz on guitar, who happens to be sitting right next to me in the WPRB studio. Stanley, welcome. Great to see you again.
So nice to be here, Marvin. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for coming. Well, we will be also talking a bit to Robert W. Butts, composer, a little later in the hour. But Stanley, I guess you could say you are here to discuss the music of Vaslav Kuchera, who passed away, I guess it was about a year ago. We will be talking about a concert featuring the music of Vaslav Kuchera in just a little while. However, before we do, tell us just a bit about him and, well, how did you get interested in his music?
Well, I've always been interested in contemporary guitar music, Marvin. And once in a while you just come across something and you say, wow, that's really special, and I have to play that music. And I heard a really old Deutsche Grammophon Japanese CD by Narcisco Yepes, probably 25 years ago, and I heard Vaslav Kuchera's Diario, homage to Che Guevara, and I thought, wow, this is something unlike most guitar music, has something special there. And so I tried to find this composer, and this was in pre-internet days, and it was a little difficult. It took me 5, 6, 8 years till I finally found someone who played the piece in Europe and put me in contact with Kuchera.
You said it had something special. Could you describe maybe a little bit what you felt? Something.
What I felt, I think, was a real connection to the guitar. That some people it seems organic to them, and some people it seems like they're a composer for the piano, but they're trying to impose their music onto the guitar. Right. He had a real connection there right from the start.
Sounds good. Well, sounds good. And you knew him?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about how you met him.
It was first he wrote me a letter from the Czech Republic, and it was very sort of old school days, and he called me comrade, which was I guess a compliment, but it was also the protocol of the time. And then we just further I asked him about, are you writing something else? And he gave me the Che Guevara piece, the Diario, and then I said, well, how about some songs? And because I was working with a soprano, I always like to work with sopranos and singers a lot. So he sent me his Rilke songs, and we started performing those with Sung-ji Kim, and now with Dominika Zamara, we're actually going to do a CD of Kuchera's music when we get time.
Yeah, well, you are, I guess, in this country, the ultimate specialist in his music, or one of them anyway.
I think he complimented me by implying that or saying that, and he was always a great friend. And because I premiered his guitar concerto also here in the U.S., and I have a dedication from him. He wrote it before I'd met him, but the dedication is very moving. That with warmest regards from Prague and with great wishes of success. And
well, let's go to that guitar concerto. Well, yeah, it was a beautiful segue, Stanley. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Because we're going to hear a work by Vaslav Kuchera for guitar and string orchestra. What are we going to hear?
It's called the Concerto Imaginativo for guitar and orchestra strings, homage to Salvador Dali. And Kuchera always was inspired by figures outside of the musical context. The works of Dali. There's a great duet that I play with another guitarist. Four pieces inspired by paintings of Max Ernst, and the Rilke inspired him. So he was always exposed by subjects outside of music. So he presents a greater picture to us. So this is a very imaginative work. This is actually the U.S. premiere.
Well, tell us, you want to say a little bit about the piece before we begin? Stylistically, something.
It's
just so people have a little idea. I want an itsy-bitsy one.
A little itsy-bitsy one. Right. It's hard to describe in a certain way. Kuchera would write in very dramatic sections, and then he would give us great surprises at certain times. And the ending of the piece is a really kind of interesting way of using a string orchestra and extra musical elements within that coming from the orchestra. I'm happy about this performance. My friend in Baltimore, Kendall Kennison, great composer, helped arrange this performance, the U.S. premiere. So that's how I wanted to bring this, even though I've done this work also with a great performance with Robert Butts here.
Okay,
New
well,
Jersey.
we're going to hear who is our orchestra and...
Oh, it's Elisa Kohler, the great conductor from Baltimore. She's a great scholar in trumpet, actually, and a great conductor, good friend. And it's the Airs Viva String Orchestra from Goucher College. It was sponsored by the Goucher Committee for the Arts.
Well, we listen now to music by Vaslav Kuchera, featuring our guitarist, Stanley Alexandrowicz, who is our guest today. Well, you were just listening to music by Vaslav Kuchera as performed by my guest guitarist, Stanley Alexandrowicz. And Stanley, you're sitting right here. Why don't you tell us what we heard?
That was his Concerto for guitar, the U.S. premiere that I gave down at Goucher College, sponsored by Kendall Kennison, the director of the music department at the time, and a great professor, great friend, great composer. And it's part of why I'm here today, is to promote the living composer's relationship to the performer, including our other guest, Maestro Bob Butts. And the Dali Concerto, Kuchera was really inspired by extra musical things. And Dali's a great figure in art history, and art-inspired Kuchera, and we heard the performance there with Elisa Kohler.
Very good. So anyway, there will be a concert featuring the music of Vaslav Kuchera. It will be on Saturday evening, April 29th at 7:30 at the 1867 Sanctuary in Ewing, New Jersey. The address is 101 Scotch Road. For more information and ticket information, you can go to 1867sanctuary.org. Well, tell us, Stanley, a bit more about the concert at the Sanctuary.
The concert at the Sanctuary, I wanted to have a great mix of things. Too much contemporary music, even though that's half of what I do is contemporary music, can get a little heavy for the audience. So I also specialize in 19th century romantic guitar music. So I'm going to play some pieces by Ivan Padovec, the great Croatian composer. We recorded a CD recently, Dominika Zamara, my duo partner, of Padovec's complete Croatian songs. I'll play a great solo based on one of Schubert's waltzes. And I'll play Maestro Bob's great early morning suite. You'll hear a little bit of this later. And we'll hear pieces by Napoleon Kost, France's greatest 19th century guitarist, a sonata by Kendall Kennison, modern work, and also his Bacchanale for solo guitar. It's based on Diebenkorn, the great artist. And Bob Butts also wrote a homage to Kuchera, a tombeau. A tombeau is a piece written in the memory of someone who died recently. And the concert will end with Kuchera's diary, homage to Che Guevara, which, politics aside, is a great piece about the tragic loss of a heroic figure. And
very good. That sounds great. Well, it just so happens that Robert W. Butts is here. And Bob, why don't you have a seat? And welcome, and I would like to welcome you. This is Robert W. Butts. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Marvin. It's a great pleasure to be here. Very exciting.
Very nice transition, too, I have to say, if I can say so myself. Well, before we hear your music, share with us a bit about your musical background, and I guess you could say some musical influences found in your works.
Well, I have a very varied background. I've worked as a singer and a guitar player in the popular music world, but in the classical music world, I got my master's thesis in musicology, and with a specialization in early music, so in the Baroque music. So, in fact, 20 years ago, in 1996, I founded an orchestra specifically because I wanted to explore conducting some, but I wanted to bring some of the orchestral Baroque music to life. Hence, my orchestra is called the Baroque Orchestra of New Jersey.
Sounds like it makes sense.
It did at the time.
And
today we do.
Yes.
Today we do everything. You name it. In fact, Stanley played the Kuchera with us.
Oh,
so
okay.
We do a wide mix of just about everything.
Wonderful.
And then I became more and more involved in conducting. Got very involved conducting opera. And I'm one of the few conductors in New Jersey to have conducted Wagner operas. So I've done a lot of that. And I've always been a composer or a songwriter ever since I was a kid. And so I've gotten much more into composing. The piece that you have, the Early Morning Suite, was actually written for a friend who played the guitar. Actually, it was somebody I was dating at the time, but she and I broke up, so I didn't finish it. I met Stanley, and I said, I'm going to finish my guitar suite. And so the tweaking and finalization was all done,
Right.
dedicated to Stanley. And right now I'm composing. I'm writing songs for an Italian musical theater piece. I've been asked to write a viola concerto, which is almost finished, for the great international violist Brett Dubner.
Oh, sure.
I'm doing. So right now, composing has really become taking the center stage.
You wouldn't have said that, though. You said 20 years ago.
No, if you had asked me the question of what I am 15 years ago, I would have said I'm a musicologist who conducts and composes. If you asked me 10 years ago, I'd have said I'm a conductor who does a lot of musicology and composes. Ask me today, I think I'm primarily focused on my composition.
Sounds good. Well, I want to go a little bit to your musical interest when you did your master's degree in early music. What was your, I guess, emphasis back then when you did that?
Well, it was still more on performance. I was a lutenist. I mean, I started as a guitar player, but when I went to the University of Iowa to start my graduate school, they had a wonderful early music program. And a massive collection of instruments. So I learned to play the crumhorn and the shawm and all of these instruments. And they had some wonderful, beautiful lutes. So being a guitar player, I just transferred from my interest from the guitar to the lute. Right. And I do have a Baroque story I'd like to tell you.
Okay.
This happened about 10 years ago. Imagine I opened my email, and I had an email from somebody who said, "You don't know me, but I have a 1693 manuscript of a complete Alessandro Scarlatti opera. Would you be interested in looking at it?" And of course,
you said no.
Right. Well, first I thought somebody must be pulling my leg here, because you just don't find a 300-year-old complete opera manuscript, especially in this area. But the truth is, it's a piece called La Giudita, and it is in the collection of the United States National Park Service. It's in the Washington's headquarters museum in Morristown, New Jersey, where they located this 300-year-old opera manuscript.
How did that turn up? I mean, it's kind of... It's interesting.
It is very interesting how it got there. It's a really long story about the collection. It belonged to a collector named Lloyd Smith, who donated his collection to the National Park System. And my friend Jude Pfister, when he became the chief of cultural resources at the park, he was always interested in Baroque music, and it's one of those coincidences. He came to one of my concerts and then discovered that he had this Baroque manuscript, and so contacted me. We performed it in 2008, and then we performed it again about 2 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, that's big. I mean, to me, that is huge, and Scarlatti is one of my favorite.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites, too.
One of my many favorites from that era, and I play his music frequently. I have over the years, and quite a bit of the instrumental stuff too.
Yes.
I was talking to you before, and I've said this on the air, about these incredible older recordings of a group of 6 concerti grossi recorded by the Scarlatti Orchestra of Naples. And I mean, I have to say, those slow movements, during those slow movements, my eyes start tearing. It's so beautiful.
Yes,
and he takes them slowly. Very slowly.
Well, some of the arias in this, it's actually an oratorio, because it's a sacred story.
Yeah.
It's just an opera, but at that time, sacred story. If it was a sacred story, it was performed in concert.
It overlapped a lot of the meanings of what those were.
I mean, if you just listened to the music and didn't know the story, you'd say, "Oh, it's an opera." But it is the story of Judith and Holofernes, and it's incredibly dramatic. I mean, it's just a really marvelous composition and story, and it has some of the most beautiful music I've ever conducted from the Baroque period.
Wow, that sounds exciting. Well, Bob, let's go to one of your pieces, and we mentioned it already, Early Morning Suite. Now, this composition will be on the concert, yes, on the 29th.
Yes, on the 29th.
So you have a chance to hear it right now, as performed by my other guest, Stanley Alexandrowicz. Bob, why don't you just tell us a little bit about the movements, and say just a word or two.
Okay, there are 4 movements. Of course, being a guitar player and then specializing in the lute, every lutenist plays. I mean, there's certain composers that you always play. And being a Baroque specialist, of course, I always wanted to play the Bach lute suites, which are just magnificent pieces of music. So I modeled it sort of off of the Bach ideas. So the first movement is a prelude, and fourth movement is a finale, but the 2 movements in between are Baroque dances. It's a bourrée and a minuet. They kind of have a more 21st century harmonic sound to them, but the underlying principles are the contrapuntal writing of Bach and the Baroque lutenists.
Yeah. Well, there's such a big influence from the Baroque in a tremendous amount of music today. In fact, you know what I find often is that people who love Baroque music, medieval and Renaissance, also like a lot of contemporary music.
I agree. It's kind of one of those interesting things, and even for myself, I mean, I conduct a lot of the standard orchestral works, but I find myself drawn towards wanting to do 18th century music or 21st century music the most.
And that's what this show is all about.
Yeah, so when I saw that, I said, wow, this is a dream.
This is great. This is wild. But there's so much interest because, you know, like when you play a piece, and I mean, I want to go to people to hear your music. When you listen to a choral work of Arvo Pärt and relate it to even something of Hildegard.
Yes, very much.
There is that interconnection.
Yes, a very strong interconnection in that music.
Anyway, let's listen to your early morning suite. This is music by Robert W. Butts, as performed by Stanley Alexandrowicz. You were just listening to music of Robert W. Butts, and that was his early morning suite. The four movements were Prelude, Bourrée, Minuet, and finally, appropriately, Finale. In our performance, you heard guitarist Stanley Alexandrowicz, who will be playing the work when, Stanley, again?
The concert's April 29th at the Ewing Sanctuary, 1876 Sanctuary. April 29th is a Sunday.
It's a Sunday, yes.
And it's actually Vaslav Kuchera's birthday. He would have been, 89 years old. He sadly passed April 22nd of last year.
Yeah, sad.
But speaking of Robert Butts, great composer.
Yeah, please do.
I asked several of my composer friends, can you write a piece in honor of Kuchera? And Bob said, oh, I'd love to, because Bob and I did his concerto also with the New Jersey Baroque Orchestra of New Jersey about 2 years ago. And so Bob wrote a great, beautiful new tombeau. I actually premiered down in Baltimore 2 weeks ago with Kendall Kennison's music series at Goucher College.
Okay, sounds very good. So why don't you share with us just a bit, Stanley, about where you will be playing Kuchera's music in other places?
I have a concert. We have a concert coming up actually at the University of Fort Kent, Maine soon. Dominica Zamara and I up in September, and I'll premiere a piece also there. Other pieces, a lot of contemporary music. What I did recently was give the Kuchera concert down in Baltimore and taught a class based on contemporary music for the guitar to composers there, which I thought was a great thing. And we had a lot of fun there teaching how to write for the guitar. And it's great working with living composers such as Robert Butts, Kendall Kennison, and others. It's one of the things I really love to do, the living composer and the current performer, the concert performer.
Well, let's just briefly talk about the concert at the 1867 Sanctuary in Ewing, New Jersey. The address is 101 Scotch Road, and this concert is on Sunday evening, April 29th at 7:30. And for more information and ticket information, you can go to 1867sanctuary.org. And again, that's Sunday evening, April 29th at 7:30. And just remind everyone what you're going to be doing on that event.
I'll be doing half of romantic guitar music and also Bob's Neo-Baroque, the suite you just heard, the early morning suite, which I've premiered in London, Philadelphia, New Jersey, New York, Italy. Recently, it's been touring the world, so it's in great demand, so I'm happy to play it again, and hopefully with greater interpretive skills each time. It's great music, which gets better each time you play it, and it's a pleasure to work on. So I'll be playing that Bob's suite, French romantic guitar music by Napoleon Coste, a very special piece, Symphonic Variations, which is a symphonic form of 5 movements put onto the classical guitar. It's one of the great pieces of the 19th century. Some pieces by Kendall Kennison, his guitar sonata, which I played recently also at the Baltimore Museum of Art. Bob's tombeau in memory of Vaslav Kuchera. And the final piece will be Kuchera's diary, Homage to Che Guevara, which is essentially the fallen hero's lifespan. Kuchera called this type of music a concert cycle, and it takes 5 days from Che Guevara's life, from his diary, and he compresses them into different movements: day of love, day of battle, day of hate, day of death eventually. And it uses the guitar in a very, very creative way that's very special to the sonorities of the guitar. So I have a mix of Baroque, classical, romantic, and avant-garde in a sense. The piece was written in 1971.
Oh, okay. Well, very good, Stanley. Well, I just want to remind you all that the MP3 audio sound files for today's edition of Classical Discoveries will be posted on my website by this evening. My website address is www.classicaldiscoveries.org. And we're going to sign off now with a composition by Kendall Kennison. This is titled Bermuda High. Why don't you just share with us a bit about him in the piece?
I'd be happy to, Marvin. Kendall's one of most of my friends are actually composers. I just love working with the living composer on the living music. It comes alive under the fingers and we can interact. back and forth and actually rewrite sections that often they're not guitarists themselves, so we can revise things. And with a cooperative young composer, it's a great pleasure. The piece was written Bermuda High, I think about 1998-99, and the Bermuda High is actually a weather phenomena down in Baltimore, where the weather hot weather gets stuck in the Baltimore area in the harbor. And Kendall was inspired by this phenomena. I asked him, Kendall, can you please write me a prelude and fugue? And because I like classical forms. But he said, well, I have something in mind. And this is like an improvisation, and the second movement's a fuguetta. And the piece rather has a feeling of the beginning of Death in Venice, where Aschenbach is musing about Benjamin Britten's great opera, about his sorrows and his life, has a very improvisatory atonal feel. And then a fuguetta at the end ends it with.
Very good. Well, I want to, Stanley, this is Stanley Alexandrowicz. I want to thank you for coming.
My pleasure,
and Bob
Marvin.
W. Butts, Robert W. Butts, I'd like to thank you for coming.
Thank you, Marvin.
It was great having you both, and best of luck with the concert. And I wish you both great success.
Thank you,
Thank
Marvin.
you so much for coming.
Such a pleasure.
And we sign off today's program with Bermuda High by Kendall Kennison, as performed by one of my guests, guitarist Stanley Alexandrowicz. Thanks so much for joining me today.